Good evening. I am Jeremy Burton, the Executive Director of the Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Boston. On behalf of the Anti-Defamation League's New England office, the Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Boston, and our 15 co-sponsoring organizations, which we will post in the chat, I welcome you to tonight's Boston Mayoral Candidate Forum. We are thrilled to have 5 out of the 6 candidates joining us this evening for this important conversation. Tonight's program begins with 2-minute opening statements. Then we will have a round of questions. Candidates will have 90 seconds or 60 seconds to respond. We will then move into a brief lightning round and conclude with 1-minute closing statements. There will be a timer on the screen to aid candidates to abide by the time allotted. If necessary, we will mute candidates to keep the program moving. The order in which candidates respond to questions has been randomized. We in the Jewish community are watching this historic moment of transition in Boston's leadership with great interest and anticipation. We have a stake in the vibrancy of Boston's future. Greater Boston is home to the 6th largest Jewish community in the country, and there are some 30,000 Jews residing in the city alone. Several of our Jewish institutions, including many synagogues that are represented here tonight, are based in the city of Boston. Many of us work in Boston, and all of us understand that the decisions made by Boston's next mayor in areas such as housing and transit affect everyone in the region. The Jewish community is incredibly diverse across all dimensions, not only when it comes to our political beliefs and religious practices, but also with respect to race, color, ethnicity, national origin, sexual orientation, and gender identity, and other characteristics. The questions that will be raised tonight represent the variety of issues that concern Jews living in the city of Boston. Most questions came from and will be asked by our program co-sponsors. Before we begin, we would like to remind the audience that ADL New England and the Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Boston are nonpartisan 501c3 nonprofit organizations. We do not endorse or oppose individual candidates nor support a specific party. We do not take sides in electoral politics, and the remarks made tonight do not reflect ADL's or JCRC's positions. Lastly, I will note that all of the candidates were invited to participate in this forum. I now invite my colleague, Robert Treston, ADL New England Regional Director, to join me on the screen. Robert will moderate the program.
Thank you, Jeremy. Let's get started with opening statements. Councilor Asabi George, you are first up, and we'll have 2 minutes for your opening statement, followed by Councilor Wu, Councilor Campbell, Mr. Barros, and Representative Santiago. Councilor Asabi George.
Thank you very much. Boston is my home. I have deep roots here, a connection that drives me to work harder and deliver more for the city I love. I believe I am the right leader for this city at this moment. I'm a small business owner, a former Boston Public Schools teacher, a counselor at large, and a proud mother of 4 teenage boys. I'm also a first-generation American. I am Polish Arab American. My father was a Muslim from Tunisia, and I grew up in a home that culture was cherished and a source of great pride. I'm happy to be here with you tonight to speak with all of you. I frequently say, to move this city, our Commonwealth, our country forward, we need to have conversations about the work that is undone. I believe that everyone needs a seat at the table, and to have these conversations, we need to do it together and better understand one another. True and lasting peace in Israel is what we all want, but we can't pretend that there isn't an imbalance of power and resources for the people of Palestine. These are tough conversations that we must have, but in no way should they lead to the demonization of people or hate crimes. We all need to work toward healing, justice, and peace. I am for doing that work here at the city level in particular, and working in partnership with all of you, because we do have a lot of work to do. It will take each and every one of us to create a stronger, more just, more inclusive Boston. And by extension, we can do that for our entire country and perhaps the world one day. I ask that you join me to do this hard work here in the city of Boston together. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wu?
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. And I'm very grateful to be here in a space convened by so many organizations and leaders across our city. My name is Michelle Wu, and I am proud to serve as a Boston City Councilor, having represented the entire city for 8 years now. I am someone who finds it a little unusual sometimes still to see that I'm on a path in government and in politics, because I grew up as a daughter of immigrants with no sense whatsoever that I ever could be involved in rooms of decision-making and power. I didn't see anyone who looked like me in government and on TV, and as the translator and interpreter in my family, grew up my entire life with a keen sense of the barriers that are invisible that so many in our society face. And what drew me to government was a realization of how much the systems and structures need to be changed and how much of a difference one can make in government. When I was in my early 20s, my mom, as she was becoming a single mom, was diagnosed with late onset schizophrenia. And so I raised my younger sisters from when they were 10 and 16. And this incredible city has given me everything that I cherish in my family's life. In the decade that I've been in City Hall, we've taken on what people always said were impossible challenges, delivering legislation after legislation, programming, and changes to reshape what is possible from the City Council. And we need that force emanating from City Hall through the mayor's office as well. It is a time of tremendous challenge. It is a time of tremendous healing. And we need to ensure that we are coming together as a city to reach for that Boston that we dream of and put together the pieces so that everyone can truly see themselves reflected in, empowered, and heard in our society. Thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you. Councillor Campbell?
Thank you for having me, and thank you, of course, to ADL and the JCRC for hosting this incredible conversation in this forum. I also want to thank the audience members for taking time out of a beautiful day to be on another Zoom. I really appreciate folks taking time to also be a part of the conversation. I have been on the council for the last 6 years, representing District 4, which is largely Dorchester, Mattapan, a little bit of Jamaica Plain, and Rosendale, working in partnership with my residents on a whole host of issues, working to improve Boston public schools, working on public safety and policing reform, working on criminal legal reform, economic opportunity, a whole host of issues, always with the goal of making sure that the systems that provide all of these services are transparent, that they're equitable, and most importantly, accountable to the residents we have the honor and the privilege of serving in the city of Boston. Many folks on this Zoom know that I majored in Judaic studies at Princeton and focused on relationships between Black and Jewish residents. It is near and dear, and it's a connection that I believe deeply in, even wrote my senior thesis on, as a allyship that could be actually, I think, remobilized in many ways to really address the inequities that exist in the city of Boston. My entire life has been shaped by this city. I was born and raised here. I grew up in Roxbury in the South End. I'm a product of Boston Public Schools. I also have felt the incredible pain of living in the city of Boston. 9 years ago, my twin brother, Andre, died while in the custody of the Department of Correction. He was a pretrial detainee. He had a disease called scleroderma, and as a result of receiving inadequate health care, passed away while in that system. So the question I ask is, how did two twins born and raised in the city of Boston have such different life outcomes? That drives my work every single day, including this run for mayor, really looking at transforming systems so they're equitable for everyone. Looking forward to discussing the issues with you all tonight, and thank you for creating the space, particularly in this moment in time.
Thank you. John Barrows?
Good evening, and thank you very much. I want to first thank the ADL and JCRC for hosting, and all of the organizations that have co-sponsored. It's good to be on. As you heard, my name is John Barrows. I'm a lifelong resident of Roxbury, and my family came here from West Africa, from the Cape Verde Islands of West Africa. And in fact, Cape Verde has a rather long Jewish tradition. In the Cape Verde Islands, we've had different ways of Jewish migration, and it's left a cultural legacy. And in fact, in the Boston area, I'm part of a Cape Verdean community that celebrates a Jewish Cape Verdean Passover Seder every year. And it's a very rich tradition. As a resident of Roxbury, I'm also part of a community with a rich Jewish history. It's captured very well in The Death of an American Jewish Community, written by Hillel Levine. And it talks about the traditions and the amazing business community that existed in the Dudley Street area, an area that I grew up as an organizer in. At the age of 14, started to improve that neighborhood, and then became the executive director of the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, where we built affordable housing, parks, playgrounds, built the largest urban land trust in the country to help improve our neighborhood without displacing our neighbors. After doing that work, I had the pleasure of serving as a school committee member, and then for the last 7 years, I've had the pleasure of serving as the chief of economic development. And improving neighborhoods and improving the lives of every Bostonian is why I have been doing this work, and it's why I decided to run for mayor, and look forward to the conversation today.
Thank you. Representative Santiago.
Great. Thank you, Jeremy. And thank you to ADL and JCRC for hosting this important forum. As was mentioned, my name is John Santiago. I'm a state representative from the South End who's had a long career in public service. In addition to my elected role, I wear a couple of different hats. I served as a former Peace Corps volunteer in the Dominican Republic. I still am a captain in the Army Reserve. I just got back from deployment last year. And on top of all that, I still work as an ER doctor at Boston Medical Center every Friday and Saturday night. I never really envisioned myself as a politician, until it came a point in my neighborhood, in my community, and for my patients where I thought they needed some change, they needed some real leadership. And so I did something in Boston that you're not supposed to do. I challenged a longtime incumbent, and I knocked on thousands of doors to make sure that my community's voice was being heard. And it's been an honor to be there for the past couple of years, in arguably some of the toughest times, and I'm particularly proud of the role that I played in this COVID-19 pandemic, when our city, when our neighborhood, when our patients needed us the most. During the height of COVID, not only did I double my hours in the emergency room, but I also was asked to be on the COVID response leadership team. And I'm proud that this past legislative cycle, we had one of the most progressive and productive cycles. We kept our healthcare system afloat. We finally passed education reform. We got police reform done in the murder of George Floyd. I'm very proud of the work we've done, but so much more is left to be finished. And so I jumped in this race to provide that leadership, to bring folks together, to really bring us to recovery, very much rooted in two things: equity and opportunity, because I think this moment right now transcends politics as usual. And it's going to require a leader. And that's what I've done my entire life, whether it's been as a Peace Corps volunteer, as an ER doctor, or as a captain in the Army. It's really about bringing folks together to solve complex problems. That's what I've done my whole life. And should I be so lucky to enter City Hall, that's what I plan to do there on the 5th floor. So thank you for the opportunity to be here this evening. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. We will now move to open-ended questions with 90-second responses. And we're pleased to have various Boston residents affiliated with some of the partnering questions to ask them. Camp Goodman, Malcolm Freeman, Ted Folkman, and Deb Shalom will ask the questions. They will introduce themselves briefly and their organizational affiliations. The order for the first question is Councillor Wu, Representative Santiago, Mr. Barros, Councillor Asabi George, and Councillor Campbell. Camp, can you please go ahead with the first question?
Thanks. Hi, my name is Camp Goodman. I'm a board member at Jewish Vocational Service and a former board member of the Jewish Community Relations Council. My wife and I are raising 3 children in the South End. My question is, last month, as the crisis in Israel and Gaza intensified, we saw a doubling of anti-Semitic incidents tied to the crisis, leaving many in our Jewish community feeling unsafe and vulnerable. If elected as mayor, what specific actions will you take to address anti-Semitism and all systems of oppression in Boston?
Councillor Wu.
Thank you very much, Camp, and thank you for contributing to our neighborhoods and our city, and for this question. I will just start by sharing some personal experience within the AAPI community that over the last year and 16 months, the experience of, I don't know if everyone can hear my screaming children outside the door, but I apologize if you can. over this last pandemic, 16 months, there's been an acceleration of anti-Asian racism and attacks and a feeling of fear permeating throughout the community, reflected in so many of the decisions that community members are making day to day in showing up for school or home or being out and about. And when there was an incident, however big or small, often it was members of the Jewish community who reached out early, forcefully saying, what can we do to stand together? The roots of the racism that each of our communities faces, the discrimination and hatred, are the same as the roots of anti-Semitism. And so we need to ensure that in any spaces in Boston, through all the infrastructure that city government oversees, which are often the connection points to shaping our culture and sense of relationship with each other, that we are building trust and creating a welcoming city. So I will ensure that from our neighborhoods to our schools to out and about, that we are always loudly and forcefully condemning incidents of anti-Semitism that may take place, but more importantly, building the coalitions and relationships to change the dynamic across the board.
Thank you. Representative Santiago.
Great. Thank you, Kim. Don't know where you live in the South End, but I count you as a neighbor. Look, you're absolutely right. You know, anti-Semitism is one of the oldest and most pernicious forms of hate, and it must be directly called out and addressed. And that's why I immediately, just recently, put out a statement to call out such an act of hatred that we saw when a neo-Nazi group gathered outside the Holocaust Memorial here in Boston. We have to understand that there are certain communities in Boston and throughout the state and through this country who continue to bear the brunt of certain patterns of discrimination. And you're going to need a mayor who will stand up for you, who's going to be vocal, and who's going to have your back. And you can count on me to ensure that the Jewish community in Boston feels safe, welcome, and supported. And you will have the bully pulpit of the mayor to fight for you, should I be so blessed to be elevated to the 5th floor. But I want you to know, Kim, that you're going to have not just an active partner who's willing to fight anti-Semitism, but I want to empower you. I want to make sure that you are telling the story of your people and your community, because I think there's a lot of learning, a lot of ignorance out there. And it's only through that we can, learn about what's going on to fight back the oppression that we're seeing. And so I think having, meetings with the Jewish community on a reoccurring basis, going to synagogues, meeting folks, making sure that, your community is represented in my administration. You have that 110%, and you have my commitment to do that as the next mayor of Boston.
Thank you. Mr. Barros.
Thank you, Camp. Thanks for the question and all the roles you play in our city. It's critical that we first start by celebrating the communities that exist in Boston. It's celebrating, it's learning, it's being with people even before we have to stand by you and fight with you. As a member of the Cape Verdean community, it was important that I learn about the Jewish heritage and the Jewish community in Cape Verde and the history there, and that we celebrate it every year through the Passover Seder, and that we in fact continue to value and acknowledge it. As Chief of Economic Development, I was honored to go to Israel to learn more, to meet with Israelis and learn about the Middle East realities, and then to strengthen the Haifa-Boston connection. These kinds of these types of relationships and ability to learn more and share more will make us stronger, so that when there are anti-Semitic activities and actions and behaviors, that we can stand next to each other, not as, I know you, I'm there because of this, but because I've known you, I see you, I value you. That's when it's strongest. And so as your mayor, I will continue to learn more, celebrate more, and then fight with you at the right time.
Thank you. Councilor Asabi George.
Thank you for the question. And I think it's great that we're starting off at this point, because in everything that we do as a city, we have a responsibility to be intentional when combating and dismantling racism, anti-Semitism, and hate. While we hear about the recent rise in hateful acts happening across other parts of this country, it's absolutely happening right here in our city and across this Commonwealth. In 2019, we've seen that dramatic increase in anti-Jewish hate crimes and incidents of hate, again, across our city. We've seen it here too. And we need to make sure that we are reinvigorated in the fight against hate. It is unacceptable, period. It has no place anywhere in this city. And you certainly can't be an ally to any movement for justice for equality or for human rights without taking that fight against hate and violence straight on. As mayor, I will certainly continue to condemn anti-Semitism, calling this hate for what it is. We need to work with our public safety agencies, with our district attorney's office, our attorney general's office, and most importantly, with our Jewish community in particular, to make sure that we are rooting out any Jewish hate and anti-Semitism. And through my work, building a leadership space and cabinet, making sure that voices are heard and experiences are lived through the work of my administration.
Thank you. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Camp, for your leadership and also for your question. And yes, we're seeing an uptick now, but of course we have been seeing an uptick over the last 4 years in the city of Boston. And I've been proud as a city councilor, as council president as well, former council president, to stand up with a whole host of organizations, not just on the Zoom, but organizations that don't identify as a Jewish organization, who all believe that hate against one community is devastating and hurtful to all of us. And so I have shown up, I have stood up, I have shown up at rallies, I have wrote letters, made calls, you name it. That advocacy would continue if blessed to become the next elected mayor of the city of Boston. But specifically to your point on the specifics, one is, it is about education. You know, we talk about changing hearts and minds. It's difficult to do that when folks don't have a deep understanding of the history of this community. I was blessed at Latin school to have Facing History. And actually, when I was there, it was the first time that that course was introduced. I learned more about the Holocaust and other forms of oppression in that class than any other class. There are many other BPS schools that don't have such curriculum. So what does it mean to make sure that we are creating a curriculum across Boston Public Schools and creating spaces for folks to have that deep understanding and to see the alignment across various ethnicities? The second is always supporting legislation at the state and federal level that combats hate crimes. And there's a way in which to do that in a more thoughtful way to create greater accountability. And lastly, transparency. Releasing data that really shows this uptick. Most folks don't know. We can do that in the city of Boston and so much more.
Thank you. Okay, the next question is going to be asked by Malcolm Freeman. Let me just say what the order is going to be for the answers. It will be Mr. Barros, Councillor Campbell, Councillor Asabi George, Councillor Wu, and Representative Santiago. Malcolm, can you go ahead and ask the question, please? You're on mute.
Yes, good evening. My name is Malcolm Freeman. I'm a member of Temple Israel, and I live in the city of Boston in the South End. My question is, please share the two most fundamental components of your plan to address systemic racism, which has created devastating inequities in Boston that persist to this day.
Mr. Barros, you're first up. Thank you, Malcolm.
Thank you. Sorry, thank you, Malcolm, for the question. Appreciate it. Important question. Systemic racism permeates all aspects of our society. And the two aspects that I think most important in dealing with systemic racism and the issues that follow, first, education. We need to make sure, in fact, that we are not only providing an accurate history of our country and an accurate teaching of all of the issues that create the disparities and the issues that are found in our systemic racist society, but that we are also, in fact, making sure that our children that are being left behind, our brown and black children specifically, are given the resources that they need to excel in education. The second would be in economic development. It is critical that we give everyone the opportunity to have a ability to succeed in our society and to provide for their families and reach for their dreams. We know that the wealth gap in Boston is horrendous, and the only way we can address it is by making sure that people can buy their homes, start businesses, access to capital, and provide the kinds of real opportunities for people to be part of the growth of the city of Boston. Those are two things that are priorities for me as mayor that I will do to make sure that we are dealing with systemic racism.
Thank you. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Malcolm, for the question and for being here. Two things, and this actually builds on my work as a city councilor and as former council president. Number one is I was really proud as council president to bring the entire council, which I had control over as council president, through racial equity training. It was a 6-month training that I fought to get funding for to make it happen. And I said the importance of doing this was a few things. One, it was making sure that everyone on the council, councilors, staff, anyone who touched the council and did the work, had a great and deep sense of the history of inequity in the city of Boston, knew about redlining, knew about busing, et cetera. And not just stay in that place, then take that information, of course, and develop a toolkit so that when we put forth policies, we don't perpetuate inequities. As mayor, I would make sure that every single city employee, not just those in our police department, which is usually what you hear, every city employee go through this type of training and that it be ongoing. We want folks to be able to dismantle systems and reimagine them. It's difficult to do that if you don't have that history training and toolkits available to you for all employees. So that's number one. The second is truth and reconciliation. I put forth a hearing on the council side to establish a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We're blessed to have some incredible leaders right here in the city of Boston that have been doing this work internationally. And as someone recently said, you can't have reconciliation if you don't have truth. Start there. But also this could be a commission that puts forth a whole host of ideas to close all of these gaps, legislative, policy, you name it.
Thank you, Councilor Campbell. Councilor Asabi George.
Thank you, Malcolm, for the question. In everything the city of Boston does as mayor, I have a responsibility to be intentional when it comes to combating and dismantling racism. We need to do the work and demonstrate that that work matters. We have to call it out for what it is and where it is in order to dismantle it, because we know that it exists everywhere. That's why we call it systemic. Of course, it's in our education system, our justice system, but it also runs through our transit system, our housing system, our open space system, and how we fill potholes. There's so much work to do, including, I'd say, and almost most importantly, although it touches all of these other pieces, is close the racial wealth gap, increase opportunities, and create more pathways to home ownership, increase access to capital when we think about economic opportunity, and make sure that we are instituting police reforms, that we are improving air quality and taking care of those that are disproportionately have been impacted by this pandemic, which we know our healthcare system discriminates against and is broken when it comes to our Black and Brown communities in particular. As chair of education of the Boston City Council, I've pushed for district-wide reform policies around the school to prison pipeline, which I believe goes directly through our sub-separate special education classrooms. I also am working to make sure that we have a prepared workforce for the future to touch that economic opportunity.
Councilor Wu.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Malcolm, for the question. The two most fundamental pieces of how my administration will dismantle systemic racism are intersectionality and urgency. Because the reality is that there is no single policy area, not even two policy areas we get to, that encompass the entirety of how families of color, particularly Black and Brown families, are experiencing the disparities pushed down by generation after generation of policies intentionally designed to concentrate resources in parts of the city and not others. And so when it comes to how we think about housing policy as deeply intertwined with education and the opportunities for quality schools, intertwined with transportation and how families are able to access these resources, intertwined with climate justice and jobs and economic opportunity, we need to break down the silos. We need to break down the silos between our communities, as Boston is a very segregated city to this day, as well as how we address issues in City Hall. And so I propose a number of plans that are up on our website that all intertwine in how we recognize the totality of our family's experiences. And the second piece around urgency is so important. At the city level, we have the power to change and transform these systems. We're often sitting back and waiting for the federal or state government to act, but time and again, through our work on the city council and through building coalitions, we've seen how much is possible when we lean in to city power.
Representative Santiago.
Thank you, Malcolm, for the question. Another neighbor of mine in the South End. Let me just say that treating patients at BMC, the busiest ER in New England, will teach you something about systemic racism. My path to medicine began when my uncle was infected with HIV. He ultimately died of AIDS when he was 36, and it wasn't just a virus that killed him. It was a lack of access to healthcare, to educational opportunities, and to economic opportunities, issues that I call the social determinants of health. And when those issues are not being appropriately addressed, that's when things like systemic racism and inequity rear their ugly heads. And so I still see it in my patients today. I worked a shift this past Friday and Saturday where poor folks, often people of color, are coming in with the same lack of opportunities that my uncle had. And so I fervently believe in order to tackle these inequities, we have to have very frank conversations about what's happening in our society and where government has failed them. And so I think to tackle these structural issues, you really have to be big and bold when it comes to two things. You have to empower Black and brown communities, and you also have to give them opportunity, really ownership opportunities to tackle the wealth gap, whether that's through home ownership opportunities or giving people capital to buy a business. And as mayor, I will empower Black and brown communities to do just that. They will reflect the community that they serve, that their communities will be very much engaged in every sector of civil society within my administration, and they will have access to capital and opportunity under my administration.
Thank you. The next question will be asked by Ted Folkman. The order for responses will be Councillor Asabi George, Mr. Barros, Representative Santiago, Councillor Campbell, and Councillor Wu. Ted, can you please introduce yourself and ask the question?
Thank you. My name is Ted Folkman. I live with my family in Roslindale. This is a question about BPS curriculum. Ethnic studies is hugely important so that our kids can learn American history that includes the history and experiences of the Black community, the Latino community, Asian American, Native American, and other communities. I know that BPS is considering an ethnic studies curriculum. I am concerned that the details of the curriculum haven't been made public. In California, where there was a similar effort to introduce ethnic studies, the curriculum was highly controversial and was criticized by diverse ethnic and religious communities, in part because it was highly ideological, hostile to diverse points of view, and hospitable to divisive ideas and stereotypes, including some that some people thought were hostile to Jews. This makes me think that it would be a really good idea for the draft curriculum to be made available to the public in Boston for discussion now, in order to avoid the kind of divisive fights that happened in California. So my question is, have you had a chance to see the pilot curriculum? Will you ensure that the public has a chance to comment on it before BPS makes a decision? How will you make sure that the schools advance racial justice and take into account the perspectives and contributions of all of the communities that make up Boston and America? Thank you.
Councillor Asabi George.
Thank you very much for the question, and I appreciate you starting this round of answers with me. As a classroom teacher, I spent 13 years teaching at East Boston High School. I've actually led the work on the Boston City Council to strengthen our ethnic studies program within the Boston Public Schools. We held a hearing last year. Actually, I think we held 2 hearings around the support for and the funding and the information around the ethnic studies curriculum as we'd like it delivered to our students. I too, especially when I think about my diverse background, both culturally, ethnically, and religiously, recognize and appreciate how important it is for us to expose our children, not just to their own histories, but to the histories of their classmates, to the stories of their classmates, to the heritage of their classmates. This curriculum, the ethnic studies curriculum, has been designed and worked on in partnership between teachers and community. And my understanding is this ethnic studies curriculum is online. And certainly we will watch as ethnic studies is implemented and introduced across the Boston Public Schools, and am committed to continuing to help form and inform the work of teaching ethnic studies across all grade levels, across all of our schools in the Boston Public Schools.
Thank you. Mr. Barros.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the question, Ted. Ted, it's when I went to Dartmouth College, I walked in as an economics major, but it didn't take me long to realize that, my real passion was in ethnic studies. And so I put together a special major and then pushed hard to establish an African-American studies major at Dartmouth College and was successful and then graduated in it. And there are tons of questions to ask about what you put into a study like that and what you're looking at and how you look at it. And in particular, mine ended up being a cross section of economies and economics and religion. And that's just where I found my passion. It is important, in fact, that not only do we make the conversation accessible and transparent, but I think that all of Boston engages in a conversation. There is no reason why we all should not be doing some form of ethnic studies. People started doing it during the last year where you had book clubs, people sharing book lists, having conversations about it. We did it at City Hall, in fact, during the protests to make sure that City Hall staff had a safe space to have these conversations. As mayor, I think we should engage parents and other civic leaders and residents in Boston in our ethnic studies curriculum and make sure that they're reading the material and that they're engaging in some activity to teach themselves and then give us feedback on what they've learned and what more they'd like to talk or learn about.
Thank you. Representative Santiago.
Yes, whatever ethnic studies curriculum is put forward that is being developed at the time will be done in a transparent manner where parent involvement will be critical to that. Listen, I know the importance of ethnic studies. A lot of the work that I've done globally, and I lived abroad for about 5 years in Latin America and Africa and Europe, and the work I do in the ER today at BMC has taught me so much about cultural competency and understanding folks. This is how folks gain greater empathy, better understanding, and how you bring folks together. And I see it in the work I do each and every day. When you talk to a patient in their respective language, or if you have an idea about their background, where they're coming from, what they've been through, you will have better outcomes. And I see it in the work I do, not just in the emergency room, but in the communities that I represent in the State House. In the work I do, it is important. And I believe the same is true for education. That's why I'm committed to making sure that we increase cultural competency across BPS. And that extends far beyond making sure that we have teachers that reflect the student body. It goes directly to our curriculum. And I believe that understanding our history and the diverse histories of each and every one of us is critical to that. So you can count on me to make sure that ethnic studies will be done in a transparent and accountable manner because it will make us better citizens. And, as Mark Twain once said, travel is fatal to prejudice and bigotry and narrow-mindedness. I feel the same way about education. And that's why I'm committed to making sure that it's a part of the curriculum, but it is one that is informed by the parents and people of Boston.
Thank you. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Ted, for the question and of course for being here tonight. I don't think you should have to wait to the next elected mayor to get in to actually be able to weigh in on this curriculum. I'm actually in contact with a whole host of folks on this Zoom who have reached out with a request to be able to see the curriculum and the training materials to be able to review it because of what we saw and continue to see in California. And I think it's critically important that parents, families, and stakeholders have an opportunity to weigh in. Let me tell you, I have sent several emails, my chief of staff as well, to Boston Public Schools to actually put out this curriculum in a more transparent way, and it is a challenge. So I think just shifting the district as a whole to be more transparent is critical, not just with respect to this issue, but so many others. But the short answer to your question is yes. I do think we should make these things available to the public to weigh in. And it's not just a question we're receiving from folks, say, in the Jewish community. Others have also reached out to us wanting to know what's in the curriculum, particularly as we talk about critical race theory, as we talk about creating an anti-racist city, what does that mean? As we talk about Indigenous folks, we were just having some hearings on this on the council side. So I think it's really incumbent that the district release it, do it now, and allow folks to participate and to allow numerous avenues for that participation, not just via email or in person, but thinking creatively about engaging a wide range of stakeholders before implementing a permanent change. But I do think it is a good thing we're heading in this direction.
Thank you. Councillor Wu.
Thank you, and thank you very much for this question. I'll just echo the fundamental importance of ethnic studies. Of course, the research shows how it is connected to academic outcomes and social emotional outcomes. We know from talking with our students, our teachers, and families that to have students' full selves reflected in what we're learning in school, as well as the ability to create space, starting from that very early platform, to create space for connection between all parts of our community. That is what we're trying to incorporate. And so we have to get it right, and we can't get it right without having everyone at the table. So I would say that there are some immediate pieces here, but then there are also some structural pieces here. I completely agree with the call to ensure transparency around what is being proposed now and to have a public conversation so that we can make sure that we're doing this in a way that reinforces the goals of our ethnic studies introduction. But I also just want to point out that we are often talking about curriculum as the vehicle to connect our students with so many bits of their potential. We have to have standing committees of teachers and family members as part of that, not just in a one-time way when we're introducing something new, but to constantly revisit, renew, and innovate when it comes to keeping education relevant and inspiring for our students. And so I put out a large education plan. I hope everyone can check it out and want to ensure that
Thank
we're
you.
centering voices in this.
Thank you, Councillor Wu. The last question in this round will be asked by Deb Shalom. The order for responses will be Representative Santiago, Councillor Asabi George, Councillor Campbell, Councillor Wu, and Mr. Barros. Deb Shalom, can you introduce yourself and ask the question, please?
Thank you. Good evening. I am Deb Shalom. My husband and I live in Beacon Hill, and I am the former ADL New England Regional Board Chair. My question for this evening. Last month, the Cambridge City Council considered a boycott, divestment, and sanctions (BDS) resolution, calling for the city to cease all contracts with Hewlett-Packard since their products are used by the Israeli government. With the recognition that 90 seconds is not enough time to delve into the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, would you support or oppose a similar resolution? One that effectively supports a boycott by the city of Boston of companies that do business with the state of Israel. If it came up here in our city, why or why not? Thank you.
Representative Santiago, you're up first.
Well, thank you for the question. The short answer is no. I would not support a stance similar to what has been in Cambridge. I mean, you're absolutely right. This is a very complicated question that cannot be digested in 90 seconds. But let me just say that both Israelis and Palestinians deserve the right to self-determination and to live safely and peacefully. And as mayor, I'm more than willing to work with any good faith partner to extend peace, safety, and security to any region of the world. And when it comes to Boston, the mayor of Boston is going to have a role in this. Boston has close and important ties with the global economy, and that's including parts of the Middle East, particularly Israel. And I think it's important that we leverage those relationships to pursue things like greater justice and peace by working in partnership, by developing greater understanding. But as with most things that I do in my life, whether it's in the State House or whether that's in the Army or in the medical field, I first seek to listen and learn before acting. And so working with community stakeholders here in Boston and advocates across the city, I'm looking to listen and learn. I don't think punishing certain businesses is the way to get there. I'm looking forward to strengthening relationships with my counterparts across the world. I will nurture those relationships because I see opportunities for listening when we collaborate, when we understand. And it's only through those relationships that I believe that Boston can serve as a role model. And then we can get past the media, past the headlines, because I think the vast majority of folks on both sides, they want peace, they want security. And I'm committed to making sure that their voices are heard.
Thank you. Councillor Asabi George.
Thank you very much, Deb, for the question. And I certainly disagree with BDS tactics because I don't think they move us in the right direction and certainly don't further the goal of a truly negotiated peace, which is what we need. While this doesn't too often come up at the municipal level, I am a strong supporter of a two-state solution and policies and actions that lay that groundwork for a certain and prolonged and sustained peace. But I've also heard the free speech concerns that have come up around BDS in this legislation, and I take those concerns seriously. While I don't believe that government and the city of Boston should participate in BDS, it would be inappropriate to prevent any citizen from using their First Amendment right to speak their mind on this issue or choose to participate in this type of protest. We have to, and certainly we play a small role at the local level, at the municipal level, but certainly there is a incredible cry and desperate need and critical reality to finding and working towards a truly negotiated and fully negotiated peace. When we think about the work that's left undone in the Middle East, when we think about the struggles and the trauma and the challenges of Israelis and of Palestinians.
Thank you. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Deb, for the question. The short answer is I do not think the city of Boston should adopt this. And I do think, frankly, it gives us the opportunity to allow our federal leaders in particular to do the diplomatic work of being able to create peace. I do believe in movements, of course, that stand up for human rights for all. I do still believe that the two-state solution is the right one. We all know it's going to take incredible work to get there. There's a lot of complexities, and like you said, 90 seconds won't do. I also have been hearing from folks who are a part of this movement and who are speaking about their First Amendment rights. I'm actually going to be engaging folks. I believe in engaging everybody. But I do think it really is thinking about the bigger picture and how we get to a place where we can actually get to peace in the region. And so that's the short answer, but would love for folks who are actually on this Zoom, who are really interested in this particular conversation. I know before the end, my contact information will be put in the chat. Would love to continue the conversation offline because 90 seconds isn't enough. And I've received a lot of emails and calls on this particular issue. So please feel free to follow up.
Thank you. Councillor Wu.
Thank you. Thank you, Deb. It's great to see you again. Even though this is outside the purview of the mayor of Boston and city government, it's important to recognize the ways in which our fights for justice, our stances for inclusion and equity are really tied to events happening all across the world. And so I think it is important to recognize how many of us in Boston are desperately working towards and hoping for peace in the region. We do have to recognize the conditions that, again, so many of us are seeing and feel horrified to see that the Palestinian people are living in, with lack of running water and public health infrastructure, lack of opportunity. I think we all know what it feels like to not feel fully represented by your government at times. And so I would not instate a BDS proposal or action, because I believe that paints a broad brush on all citizens, regardless of individual views, with that broad brush. And so we need to be working in Boston and around the world for a multi-ethnic, multiracial coalition pushing for peace and justice beyond our borders in Boston, and ensuring that we are part of that conversation as well.
Thank you. Mr. Barros.
Thank you, and Deb, thanks for the most difficult question of the night. Appreciate it, and for your leadership. I think it was clear in Israel as we had conversations with both Palestinians and Israelis. They're super complex question, right? And there are people working to try to make sure that we moving towards peace on both sides of this. And as complex as it is, I think people agree that we have to have and protect human rights and human dignity, and work together to move towards that, and peace as the ultimate goal. Now we know that in that push for that there are conversations about what kind of pressures we can put on and pressures we can't put on. I think as Americans, we're woefully underinformed and in a super complicated conversation. So I think yeah, any of those policies that are broad in that way, I think don't necessarily serve the end goal. I think we should all learn more, talk to more people, and try to move the conversation towards a peaceful end. And as me, I'd try to do that.
Thank you. We're now going to transition to questions with 60-second responses. And our questioners for this section are Rabbi Barbara Pensner, Stephanie Shapiro-Berkson, Michelle Casorla, and Marion Milbauer. They are all Boston residents and are all affiliated with co-sponsoring organizations for the forum. Rabbi Pesner will ask the first question, And the order of responses for this question is Councillor Campbell, Mr. Barros, Councillor Asabi George, Representative Santiago, and Councillor Wu. Rabbi Penzer, please introduce yourself and ask the question.
Yes, I'm Rabbi of Temple Hill, Albany, Torah in West Roxbury, a congregation who got its name about 50 years ago in that tragic time described in Death of an American Jewish Community when Temple Beth Hillel closed in Mattapan and joined with Beth Torah in West Roxbury. And our congregation is filled with activists who care deeply about people, everyone in Boston. So my question is, as we know, our country has historically disinvested in Black and Brown communities and neighborhoods. And as we know, to add to that, Black and Latinx owned businesses have suffered greatly during the pandemic. So as mayor, what can you commit to in terms of uplifting those businesses, helping to close the racial wealth gap, and prioritizing community wealth building in Black and Brown communities in Boston?
Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Rabbi, for the question. It's great to see you. And thank you for this particular question. This is an issue that has been near and dear long before as a candidate for mayor, because many of the businesses you described are currently in my district, which is largely Mattapan and Dorchester. And we know Mattapan, where I live with my beautiful husband and two beautiful boys, did at one point have a robust economic district. Uhalab was bustling, largely with a Jewish community. So a few things. One, with the federal dollars that are coming in, I think we need immediate and more investment in businesses largely run by women and people of color. I also think, too, we need to bring our own resources to bear. The city of Boston has a nearly $3.8 billion budget. And a recent study showed that we are just not doing well when it comes to supplying capital to these businesses. We need to do better. Once we do better in providing capital, technical assistance, mentorship, we can then push the private sector, the meds and the eds to do the same, to diversify their businesses and supplier relationships as well.
Thank you. Mr. Barros.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Barber. Good to see you. It's an important question. And for me, it starts with building capacity in the community and the fact so that the community can lead. It's work that I've been doing and did as executive director of the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative. We were able to transform our community because we took the leadership to make the change. And it's important that we also recognize that government partnership in that effort was important. So as mayor, I will partner with communities to build community wealth. I helped to build the largest urban land trust in the country to help not only steward land in our neighborhood but also to create collective wealth. I would also make sure that we have a neighborhood investment fund so that the residents of the neighborhoods can invest in the development in their own neighborhood. And then it's clear, in fact, that we need to trust our communities in building out their own community. So I will create a fund for land trusts and for community acquisition so that the community can actually guide what is happening in their community.
Thank you. Councillor Asabi George.
Thanks for that question. When we think about economic opportunity, we think about supporting our families, in particular, our families of color. I think the best place to start is in our communities, in our neighborhoods, and with those small business owners, because they are the backbone of our neighborhoods. As a small business owner myself, I know how much blood, sweat, and tears goes into building a business and the capital resources and tools necessary to do that. In my capacity as a city councilor, I've continued to meet over these last almost 6 years with local business owners and their employees and their community members that support that business to help our businesses and our neighborhood businesses in particular build and rebuild, especially post-pandemic. We need to be very intentional about giving our Black and Brown entrepreneurs and small business owners a fair shot at succeeding. And we know that we don't do enough of that now. I will create a new business liaison for each neighborhood to meet with those businesses and meet their needs.
Thank you. Representative Santiago.
Well, thank you for the question. We cannot talk about addressing the wealth and health gap if we don't talk about systemic racism. You know, we talked about this a couple of questions ago. As I mentioned, when it comes to addressing systemic racism, you know, we have to empower Black and Brown communities to be at the table. You know, and secondly, we have to make sure that we provide capital in order for them to own things, right? You know, whether it's small business or whether it's home ownership opportunities. Because to really close that gap, you know, we need to get at these social determinants of health, right? That's education, that's access to healthcare, that's economic opportunity, that's stable housing and home ownership opportunities. And I'm proud that as a state representative, I've done just that, and arguably one of the most progressive and productive legislative cycles in recent memory. And as mayor, I'm looking forward to continuing that record, whether that's addressing the achievement gap to providing opportunities in our education system, whether that's creating pipelines into our union industry and our green economy in the life science sector that is here, and home ownership opportunities by making sure the city's investing, not just the federal government, but the city's investing in doing that. And that's what I'll do as the mayor of Boston.
Thank you. Councillor Wu.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi, for the question. Just to give a sense of scale of how deep these disparities are, everybody can envision many, many restaurants where you can go in Boston, sit down and have a drink. There are more than 1,000 restaurants in Boston with liquor licenses. There are only 8 Black-owned restaurants with liquor licenses in the entire city of Boston. This is a deep systemic issue that we have the tools to solve. I'm proud to have led the charge starting more than 5 years ago, partnering with then Councilor Ayanna Pressley to ensure that the city of Boston passed legislation to have accountability for how we were spending our own contract dollars and to hold ourselves to higher standards. We need to keep increasing those goals of how much we invest in our own communities, in Black and Brown owned businesses through the city budget. We need to ensure that we're simplifying a system which is often a culture of no right now. So it requires tremendous resources to get through the permitting process and make that available for mom and pop businesses. And we need to use this moment of great vacancies to fill and repopulate closing these gaps.
Thank you. The next question will be asked by Stephanie Shapiro-Berkson, and the order for responses will be Councillor Wu, Representative Santiago, Councillor Campbell, Councillor Asabi George, and Mr. Barros. Stephanie, can you please introduce yourself and ask the question?
Hi, nice to see each of you. I'm Stephanie Shapiro-Berkson. I live across the street from Boston Medical Center between Harrison and Albany in the South End, and I'm a member of the Jewish Alliance for Law and Social Action, JALSA. My question for each of you is, as a Jewish community, we're deeply concerned about the police's treatment of Black and Brown Bostonians, including Jews of color. We're also concerned about keeping our faith communities and institutions protected. As mayor, what are the top 2 initiatives you plan to prioritize safety for all in Boston? Thank you.
Councillor Wu.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. We need to recognize that public safety and public health are one interconnected system. And when we treat it in a silo, we end up not responding to situations with the appropriate services and introducing harm to communities. My mom lives with mental illness. I have been in those situations where you are terrified when she's in the depths of an episode and the police are called and begging for her to go to the hospital instead of the police station. We need to have a public health-led approach, particularly when it comes to crisis response. I've led the way in pushing for this on the Boston City Council, and there's now a pilot being tested out in how we can better connect our residents to resources when we shouldn't be responding with armed law enforcement, but with a background related to addressing homelessness, mental health, or substance use. We also need to have accountability for actions. This gets down to the contracts that the police union has with the city. I've put out a detailed plan on how I would ensure that transparency and accountability in the fundamental document.
Thank you. Representative Santiago.
Hey, Stephanie, it's good to see you. You're absolutely right. I mean, there's no question that our criminal justice system has been stacked against communities of color, and that George Floyd's murder taught us that police reform must be at the table. And I'm very proud that as a member of the Black and Latino Legislative Caucus that we led that fight at the state level, right? And we got it done here in Massachusetts. We created a police oversight commission. We restricted no-knock warrants. We prohibited chokeholds. We restricted qualified immunity, but that needs to carry on at the city level. And as mayor, I'm very much interested in making sure that we decrease the reliance on police officers by using a public health approach, because I see the rising toll that mental health and substance use is having in my community here in the South End. And as the ER doctor, we got to implement what I would argue a community crisis assistance diversionary program where we're supporting and implementing efforts with the BPD to make sure that the appropriate people are at the scene, mental health clinicians, public health people, because that is what I'm seeing in the emergency department. That's what we're seeing across the city of Boston.
Thank you. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Stephanie, for your question, and I appreciate you lifting it up in the context of all communities. I will be very frank. This is an issue I've been leading on since I joined the council. I chair the Committee on Public Safety and Criminal Justice. I'm really proud of my record of accomplishment when it comes to public safety issues. And frankly, these are issues that one of the reasons I jumped into the mayor's race is because of the inaction on reports I had put out over the years around diversifying our police department, creating greater transparency and accountability. The two things, number one, I'm really proud of historic legislation that was passed in the city of Boston, which I led the charge on. This is the Office of Police Accountability and Transparency. I helped draft that legislation and worked with the mayor's task force to get it done. It's not about just creating a shop for an office for people to go to if something happens. It also is charged with pushing the department to release data, metrics, and make policy changes. The second is reallocation of resources to these very efforts. I'm the only candidate with an in-depth plan on how to do that. Please take a look, 60 seconds,
Thank you.
Not enough time.
Thank you. Councilor Asabi George.
Too many times we criminalize mental health, substance use disorder, and homelessness. That needs to stop. On the city council, I have fought to integrate our mental health response into our public safety response. I've expanded and advocated for the best clinicians to be part of our response for those that are in the midst of a mental health crisis. I've led on that work on the city council and will continue to lead on that work as mayor. I've also pushed to make sure that our 911 call centers have had licensed clinical social workers available to ensure that we are connecting residents to the services they need. Boston has a tremendous opportunity to implement the reforms that are before us and demonstrate the benefits of accountability and transparency, and to truly lead on community policing. We do that when we are community and police in partnership. When we think about the role of government, public safety is critical to that.
Thank you. Mr. Barros.
Thank you very much. Stephanie, this is very important. And it's something that I've been working on for a very long time. If you just check Streets of Hope by Holly Sklar, you'll see that at a very young age, we were working on police reform. As a young Black man, I was confronted with a number of issues, well documented. But I've seen police at its worst, but I've also seen police at its best. As we continue to push, as we continue to work, we saw really good police partnerships and police working with community to help bring safety. But safety is brought about by making sure that we can address the causes, the root causes of crime. And that's making sure as a mayor that I'm supporting those who are working on the root causes of crime in our neighborhoods, trauma, homelessness, mental health issues. These are things that we've got to take care of, which is why I have proposed a new agency in the city of Boston that responds to these types of calls in our city.
Thank you. The next question will be asked by Michelle Casorla, and the order of responses will be Councillor Campbell, Councillor Asabi George, Representative Santiago, Mr. Barros, and Councillor Wu. Michelle, can you introduce yourself and ask the question, please?
Thank you. My name is Michelle Casorla. I live in the South End, and I'm a member of ADL New England's Associate Board. My question for you is, much attention, rightfully so, has been drawn to the work to reopen schools safely during the pandemic. With students returning to the classroom, we are concerned about an uptick in bias incidents directed towards Black, AAPI, LGBTQ+, and now Jewish students. As mayor, what steps will you take to build inclusive school communities where students of all identities feel supported to learn and grow?
Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Michelle, for the question. This is work I've been involved with as a lawyer. I started my legal career actually at a local nonprofit in Roxbury, representing students and their parents in education cases for free. Most of those families dealt with a whole host of issues, special needs cases, discipline cases, but a lot of bullying cases with respect to the very issues you're talking about. I think it goes back to our previous question around hate in the city. So one, it is about culturally competent curriculum and creating spaces within our schools for folks and students to get to know each other. Some of that happens through restorative justice circles. Some of that happens through mindfulness, social emotional learning. Not every school in the city of Boston has that. So it's creating these opportunities. It's making sure every school has the resources to do this. And then the last piece is, our children are actually, I think, more resilient than we think. And so the summer, I think this summer will be an opportunity where if we take the federal dollars, we could invest in creating these spaces right now before our students return in person.
Thank you. Counselor Asabi George.
So as a former teacher and now as a city councilor and chair of the council's committee on education, I have worked tirelessly to make sure that our kids have access to the resources they need. In addition to a rigorous curriculum, they need access to the social and emotional supports that are so important to making sure that they are not just able to engage in their curriculum, but they feel safe, that they feel happy, that they feel loved. I've advocated for a full-time nurse in every school building. I've gotten that. I'm now making sure that we have a full-time social worker or mental health professional in each one of our schools to best support our schools, our school communities, and our kids. We need to make sure that our kids feel supported day in and day out, that they have the resources to cope with what is the next pandemic, the next crisis, which is a mental health crisis. We have to be prepared for the return to full-time instruction and make sure that we are taking very good care of our kids every single day.
Thank you. Representative Santiago.
Great. Every student deserves an excellent education and a safe place to be. You know, schools are places to grow, to mature, and to expand that social, emotional learning. And the education has to be free from bias, any harassment or marginalization. You know, we have to do a better job here in Boston and making sure that our most vulnerable student populations, whether they're queer, Latino, Black, AAPI, or EL, they can be successful. And that's why I put out several plans to address school bias, and particularly with respect to our BIPOC communities and our LGBTQ communities in Boston. And as mayor, listen, I want to do more than just create safe places and BPS for our students. You know, I want to do that first and foremost in conversation with students and parents and school officials. And I just don't want to just hire teachers and school counselors from BIPOC communities. I mean, that's an automatic thing that we have to do, but it means hiring the mental health professionals to address what we've experienced for the past 15 months. I see it in the neighborhood conversations I'm having with parents. I see it in the increasing number of children coming to my ER to seek mental health services. We need to significantly invest in this.
Thank you.
Mayor of Boston, I'll do that.
Thank you. Mr. Barros.
Thank you very much. It's a very important issue. I spent years working with BPS to help improve the supports, mental and emotional supports that we provide to our students. You can't learn if you don't feel safe. You can't learn if you don't feel valued. It's critical that we do this work with students. And so the work that we did with the Jeremiah E. Burke students was making sure that students were at the table talking about what they need, and then that we are able to respond both with the resources and the adults that are needed to make sure that we're creating safe space, to make sure that we're creating safe space that allows for people to grow and deal with some of the social or domestic issues that follow them to school. And then at Orchard Garden Pilot School, we did this work with students there in the middle school, and that one involved more parents. And so critical as we engage students that we engage parents in making sure that whatever's happening in school is supported at home. And as mayor, I'll make this a priority.
Thank you. Councillor Wu.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle, for the question. This is deeply personal for me. Come September, I'll be sending all of my most precious cargo to BPS every morning, one drop off finally, when my soon-to-be first grader and 3-year-old will be starting K1. And I've been in the BPS system on this side for nearly a decade now, having raised my sister through middle school and high school as a legal guardian. This is about every way that we should be creating a sense of safety and welcome throughout the infrastructure. And that is not just curriculum, as we've discussed earlier in the conversation, but what expectations we're setting, what message we're communicating when we have metal detectors in some of our schools, when we have police officers or school resource officers in some of our schools. We need to be ensuring that we have the facilities that allow for spaces to fully inspire and support our students, the social and emotional supports, everything from food, reflecting every culture in our community, to the opportunity for each of us to be part of shaping what an anti-racist school system looks like.
Thank you. The last question in this section will be asked by Marian Milbauer, and the order for responses will be Representative Santiago, Councillor Campbell, Councillor Wu, Councillor Asabi George, and Mr. Barros. Marian, can you go ahead and introduce yourself and ask the question, please?
Hi, my name is Marian Milbauer. I moved to Boston in 1989. I worked at Two Life Communities, an organization that provides service-enriched housing to more than 1,500 low-income older adults throughout Greater Boston, more than 900 of whom live on our Brighton campus. Boston's housing crisis is affecting all the city's residents, including Jewish community members. Housing affordability is driving people out of our city and discouraging new people from moving here. As mayor of Boston, what would you do to increase the availability of affordable housing?
Representative Santiago.
You are absolutely correct. We have an affordable housing crisis in the city of Boston, and that was exposed and exacerbated under COVID. And we quickly learned that housing justice equals health justice as well. And I'm very proud that my record on Beacon Hill has stood up to that. We passed the most progressive eviction moratorium in the country. We passed housing choice reform, and we invested record $153 million in vouchers. And as mayor, I want to continue that. I think it's important that we be innovative and strategic about really investing in affordable housing. I want to use our AAA bond rating, something that we hold and share so tightly, and making sure that we can issue hundreds of millions of dollars in bonding to build the types of affordable housing that you want to see, whether that's transit-oriented development, whether that's equity-oriented development, whether that's making sure that the people in Boston who've helped create the social fabric of their communities can stay there. I want to hand the use of our AMI and really recalculate it to make sure that Boston is using. I want to invest in community land trusts. I think there's a lot we can do in the city of Boston, but it's going to require political will and money. And I think using the AAA bond rating can do just that.
Councilor Campbell.
Marion, thank you for the question and thank you for your work and your leadership. A few things. One, I think it starts with just expanding our tools in our toolkit in terms of funding sources. I was really proud that my first piece of legislation on the council was a Community Preservation Act. It's generating millions of dollars every single year, 20 million most recently, for the creation of affordable housing. So what does it mean to go to the state to push for a higher match? I'm all for also expanding IDP in a reasonable way to create more funding sources. I think second, we have to be creative. I was really proud to start the vacant lot initiative that exists in the city of Boston, activating city-owned vacant lots. And there are hundreds of them for housing purposes, and not just rental opportunities, but homeownership opportunities, particularly for families, for seniors, for those in certain communities. We were just talking in the council about a Russian community in Halston, Brighton that's going to be displaced. And then the last piece is around also being creative legislatively. I have in my plan creating a voucher program and doing more for folks who live in public housing.
Thank you. Councilor Wu.
Thank you, Marion, for the work that you do. Two Life is truly an example for what we should be striving for when it comes to housing stability, but also building community. And it was so great to see so many friends at Two Life recently who I've had the chance to know year after year after year because of the opportunity to have that stable housing. We have the power in city government to do more in this moment, and we must do it to have an equitable recovery. I'm committed to dedicating $200 million at least of our federal American Rescue Plan federal relief funds to ensure that housing stability is the foundation of our recovery. We can use city resources through our capital budget to directly construct affordable housing. We can use our city-owned properties to integrate affordable housing into the redevelopment of libraries and community centers, municipal parking lots. We can innovate when it comes to vouchers for homeownership or increasing our rental subsidies. And most of all, we need to stabilize our communities as well. We need rent stabilization to prevent displacement.
Thank you. Councilor Asabi George.
Thank you, Miriam, for the question. I look forward to the virtual conversation I'm having with Two Life Communities about your community and the model that you are utilizing later this week. We must ensure that we are building housing that meets the needs and realities of Boston's residents, especially our older residents. We know that you are struggling to pay rent, and our families can't find or afford stable housing, and too many of our individuals are experiencing chronic homelessness. As mayor, I will work to create better paths to homeownership and build more affordable and more truly affordable housing with a focus on creating generational wealth to break down systemic racism and increase equity across every neighborhood. I strongly support the creation of more affordable and workforce housing for working families, for our seniors, and those living in poverty. It's so important that we make sure that we have the type of housing that Bostonians need and that we are creating that pathway to ownership regardless of age.
Mr. Barros.
Thank you very much. It's clear Boston continues to be a city that's too expensive. Too many of our families are being displaced, but this has been happening for a while. As Executive Director of Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, I dedicated most of my professional life to build affordable housing, permanent affordable housing. And then when I got to the city, we helped to move what had been long-term affordable housing to permanent. And then we created hundreds of new affordable home ownership opportunities and rentals, more than has been created in Boston's history. Most recently, we worked with the business community to increase linkage fees to make sure that we can create more affordable housing and support workforce development. As mayor, I would continue the historic pace of investment in affordable housing, make sure that we have housing for our seniors, those who are transitioning from homelessness, our young professionals. It is critical that we have a diverse community in every way in Boston. I'd use all assets of the city and be really creative in making it happen.
Thank you. Okay, before we move to the closing statements, we have a couple of quick lightning round questions. So I'm going to ask the candidates. I think everybody's got their answer cards, and I will ask a couple of questions, and then the responses will just be you sharing your responses via the card. So the first question: this year, due to COVID-19, we saw the Boston exam schools change their admissions policies to ensure that the process is more equitable for all of Boston's students. Do you support maintaining this new system for years to come? Thank you. Next question. Immigrants are a source of vitality and an economic engine for our city. One of the most important concerns right now is making sure that all immigrants, regardless of status, have access to obtaining a driver's license. Do you support the bill which is now in the state legislature to do this? Thank you. Between January and early April of 2021 alone, legislation has been introduced in more than 20 states targeting transgender people. The overwhelming majority of these bills target transgender youth by preventing them from participating in athletics or making it illegal for them to access gender-affirming medical care. Other bills would make it difficult or impossible to change one's sex designation on a birth certificate or require schools to inform parents and guardians of a student's gender identities. Will you commit to protecting trans youth in Boston? Thank you. Do you believe that children in Boston should be required to learn about the Holocaust and genocide before graduation? Okay, thank you. All right, I have, before we get to closing statements, maybe we could go super quick. Tell us about your favorite Jewish food and the best book you've read recently. And we'll go with Representative Santiago, Councillor Campbell, Councillor Wu, Councillor Asabi George, and Mr. Barros. So Representative Santiago, favorite Jewish food and best book.
So favorite Jewish food, one of my staff members just invited over to this Passover. We had, you're going to find this funny, but there's some spicy gefilte fish that was made that was quite tasty. Favorite book, I just reread Team of Rivals by Doris Kearns Goodwin. And so it's a favorite of mine. I just reread it for some inspiration.
Councillor Campbell.
Matzo ball soup made by my lovely husband, Matthew Shire. And then the second I'm reading, and it's a dense book, it's a heavy book, The Condemnation of Blackness by Khalil Muhammad, looking at how we racialize crime in the city and also in the country, and have historically.
Councillor Wu.
There are many. I will go with bagels as an oldie and for the symbolism. And then on the book side, a more recent one, We the Possibility, We Get the Government That We Invent.
Councillor Asabi George.
So my favorite treat would be apples and honey. And I think that no matter what time of year it is, it's a great time to have apples and honey. And the book that I'm currently reading is Dismayed and Driven, which follows a woman as she travels to meet families experiencing homelessness across our country.
Thank you. Mr. Barros.
I'll have to go with matzo ball soup. Andrea, I'll come over. Just tell me when. I think the book would be Cast by Isabel Wilkerson. Great book. I thought the piece around sort of what we took from other countries and what we're learning from other countries, including Nazi Germany, was powerful. And so a great book, recommended for everybody.
Okay, thank you. We will conclude tonight's forum with 60-second closing statements. And the randomized order is Councilor Asabi George, Representative Santiago, Councilor Campbell, Mr. Barros, and Councilor Wu. Councilor Asabi George, please proceed with your closing.
Thank you, everyone, for having us here this evening, and I think asking us not just challenging and thoughtful questions, but questions and topics of conversation that have been different than some of our past forums, and we've done a lot. I often say that nothing is off the table when everyone's at the table, and this evening there was a great deal of conversation at tonight's table. We really need all of you to come together with us and to have these tough and difficult conversations to make sure that we are moving our city forward. As mayor, I commit to being present and accessible as I have been as an at-large city councilor. It's so important to hear your stories firsthand, to understand your struggles and your successes. It's also important that we use your experiences to lead and set the agenda, and for us to do this all together. I'm grateful for that opportunity as an at-large councilor, and I look forward to do this as your mayor.
Thank you. Representative Santiago.
Thank you, ADL New England and JCRC for hosting this very important forum. And thank you for your thoughtful questions. And thank you for your desire to really step up and engage, and for your belief that we're all connected, right? Because some of your struggles have been my struggles. I mean, it's our struggles collectively. And it's not just about identifying as one another, but also really understanding that so much of what we do is related, right? When we talk about systemic racism, these structural issues, we have to understand that housing, economic justice, transportation, climate, that there's a lot of intersectionality between all that. So the questions you asked today and the partnership that you've provided for the course of your time in public service really do mean a lot to the conversation and to me, because it's been through those conversations with people like yourself that's become clear to me that we have a whole host of issues in the city that need to be addressed in a bold and comprehensive manner. And that's what I've been fighting for my entire life, particularly for those most vulnerable. And that's what I'll continue to do should I be so lucky to enter City Hall.
Thank you. Councilor Campbell.
Thank you all for organizing this conversation. Thank you for this very visible timer, which is what we did not get on other forums. Really appreciate that. And to all of the organizers. I would be honored, frankly, to have the support of each and every one of you on this Zoom. I jumped into this race back in September, recognizing the moment in time we're in this country and in this city, to say this is Boston's time to have the difficult and sometimes hard conversation about our painful history when it comes to racism and division, but not to stay there, to work as a larger community across every demographic, every neighborhood, every industry, to close the persistent inequities that exist in every system you can imagine. I've done that work as a city councilor. I would continue to do that work if I'm blessed to become the next elected mayor in the city of Boston. Because for me, this work is not only professional, it's also personal. I've always operated with a sense of urgency. I put out a sense, so I should say, really in-depth policies. Please do take a look at my website. It's andreacampbell.org to review them. And I look forward to staying engaged with this community. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. Barros.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the ADL and all of the organizations that came together to put the forum together. It's as a man of faith, deeply embedded in my faith community. I am, grateful to the Jewish community for my Judeo-Christian roots. It was amazing to be in Jerusalem and have deep appreciation for the religion, but then also have deep appreciation for the culture and what it's meant to not only the Cape Verde Islands and the legacy there, but also to Roxbury, to Blue Hill Ave and the legacy in our community. And so it is important that we recognize, that we value, that we celebrate the Jewish community, Jewish history in Boston, and then Jewish present day work. It is really important, and I look forward to doing that as mayor. Take a look at my platform at barrelsformayor.com.
Thank you. Councilor Wu.
Thank you very much. I'm so grateful to all the organizers for convening us tonight and for your leadership throughout the city. I am just honored to be a candidate for mayor in this incredible field. As the first to declare, and as a mom with kids in our schools, as a caregiver for my mom, I and my campaign have always been focused on building the coalitions to deliver courageous leadership and not back down, to have the political will to make transformative change. That's what we need in this moment. And we know that in times of difficulty and deep challenges, our resilience comes from building community. I know that an emphasis on the wider community has been the organizing structure and strength of Jewish life. And in communities, we pick each other up so that we together can do what none of us alone could ever dream of doing. That's the Boston that I'm fighting for. I'd love to see you join and build this coalition. MichelleForBoston.com. Thank you.
As we conclude tonight, I just want to make a recognition and a reminder that it was 57 years ago today that the civil rights workers Andrew Goodman, James Chaney, and Michael Schumer were murdered by the KKK for simply registering Black Americans to vote. And so it's a reminder to everyone on this call to register to vote if you have not done so already. According to the City of Boston's website, you must register 20 days before the primaries and general elections. You can do this online, by mail, or in person. The primary will take place on September the 14th, and the general election for mayor will take place on November 2nd, 2021. Please go vote. It is your civic duty to do so. I want to thank everyone for joining us for this insightful forum, and I want to give a special appreciation and thanks to all of the candidates who took time out today to share their views, our program co-sponsors, and a special thanks to JCRC for organizing this program with ADL New England. Wish everyone continued good health, stay safe, and have a great evening. Thank you all for being with us tonight.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
everybody.
Thank you. Good night.